I don't believe half of the time the writer's just thinking, "What sounds good? Oh, that sounds all right," and they just throw it out there.
The author was it was 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and the
It
author had
would,
to hit their word count.
yeah, I bet. I don't know. I don't think. I mean, maybe some authors think about every single word, but
It was Hemingway. Hemingway was into his second bottle of wine, and
yeah,
um,
writing. Didn't he say
yeah,
write drunk, edit sober? Wasn't that Hemingway? Said
yeah.
that.
I love his
Very good plan.
A Movable Feast.
I haven't read any Hemingway. I don't
I
think.
really, oh, you should. It's great.
No, I
He is
think I should.
great.
I should, and especially with his Spain connections as well. And
Yeah.
he's got stuff, set in Spain, hasn't he? Bullfights and all that sort of stuff. I should definitely
I
read some.
think he's probably less gripping now that, he's become so fashionable. But when he started writing, it must have been extraordinary. I used to, when I taught creative writing, I would do all kind of different set examples of writers. And there was a Hemingway quote I did from one of his African ones. And it was two sentences. They came to the river, full stop. The river was there, full stop. I just thought it was brilliant. So
What
cool.
a...
Yeah.
And on that note, welcome
Yeah.
to Rock Paper Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harffy.
And my name is Justin Hill.
And we
We're
are
discussing
talking about
writing.
Hemingway. Yeah, we're talking
Yeah,
about
brilliant
writing and
writing.
Hemingway and all sorts. And talking of brilliant writing, Justin, have you done any writing today?
Yeah, I'm editing. So I have a first draft that I finished before Christmas, and I've been going through it quite meticulously. And I'm really pleased how it's coming out. I'm cutting a lot,
Right. Okay.
but I'm kind of shedding. I changed the opening scene. I had like five possible opening scenes, and I picked the one I thought was the best. And that meant quite a few characters who were essentially there to die disappeared. So they still die, but
Ah,
they die off stage now, so they're no longer interesting. Um, so yeah, making kind of quite big changes, but pootling along, about 10 pages a day. And
interesting.
yourself?
Yes, it sounds like you go about editing in a slightly different way than I do. I think you
Hmm.
sound like you tackle the edits much more in a structural way when you come into that sort of that edit phase. But
Hmm.
I'm not there yet. Anyway, with we can talk about when I do finally get there. I'm
You're still
about
working on your first draft,
I'm
yeah?
working on the first draft, and it's 35 coming up with 35,000 words, which I remember saying
Okay.
to you back in early December that I'd be happy if I got to 35,000 before Christmas, and I obviously
Yeah.
didn't because I've just hit 35,000 now. But I wrote more than 2,000 words today, and so I feel like at least progress is being made. And it's one of those weird things that I at the moment I'm in a phase where, and every book is like this for me. I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I get to this, well, basically until I get sometimes until I finish the book, but it depends on the book. But there's always a moment in the book, and the first half of the book at least, or the first third maybe, where I feel that everything I'm writing is absolutely rubbish. And I
Hmm.
really struggle to enjoy the process of writing at all. And I'm in that phase at the moment when I'm really struggling with it. And it's like, oh my God, this what am I writing? This absolute rubbish. Because I think the reason is because in my mind, in the back of my brain, because I've done sort of some planning but I think in the back of my brain, every time I start a new chapter or a new paragraph, even, and something happens, a character, you suddenly think, oh, I've got to make a decision now about what this character's going to say or what they're going to do or what's going to happen because I don't, you can't plan every detail. So when you get there, I'm sort of having to make those choices. And in making those choices, all the time I'm thinking, oh, this doesn't quite make sense with the motivations that I thought the character would have, or how am I going to make this make sense later on when I know that I want other things to pay off later? And so it's a
Yeah.
lot of kind of self doubt, I guess, in
Yeah.
the process. And usually when I come back to it, it's not as bad as I think. In fact, it never has been as bad as I think.
Yeah.
But it's a horrible feeling though, because
It's a struggle.
it definitely is a struggle. It's definitely it's like a first world problem, and I'm not complaining. I felt like sometimes Stephen and I would have these conversations before, and I'd say to Stephen off air sometimes, maybe like, if I feel like all we're doing is just moaning about how difficult it is to write, and it's like that's not really the case, because
Yeah.
it's a great job, but it's a difficulty of itself, like that's difficult to explain, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think often with writing, you're kind of you you're pushing the barriers of what you can do. I mean, you've never written Rome before. So you've got different characters, different
Yeah,
culture, different setting. So there's all kinds of new things.
yeah,
And so you're doing lots of new things at the same time, whilst, it's not like turning up to,
yeah.
it's not like driving a bus. You turn up,
Well, it's
I'm
it would
not
be
dissing
like
bus drivers, but
but it would be like driving a new type of bus on the other side of the road with different traffic laws. It's sort of at the same time for your first day
yeah,
at work and having to sort of
wearing
deal
a
with that, and that
toga.
where and doing it with one eye closed or something, or without your son, and leaving your glasses on with a new prescription of glasses. It's like having lots of different new obstacles. I think your thing of you saying like extra challenges, I think you're right. There's lots of new things thrown in your path, and it's very tiring because your brain is kind of trying to process everything. And
Yeah, they sound small, but when you're trying to imagine a room and
yeah,
characters, walking into it, sitting down, you have to think, what are they sitting on? Who's
yeah,
there? What's on the floor? What's the room
absolutely.
made of? What's the
Those
roof made of?
those are the things that I add often in my very first pass of edits. I'll add a few
Mm,
of them, and then in my
mm.
second sort of my first big read through edit. Well, even before I do a read through and I go and I'm filling sort of gaps, and I'll be looking and reading little sections and filling gaps, and that's when I'll add lots of those sort of details.
Yeah,
But even today, I was writing following on from a scene that I'd written on Friday, and I suddenly realised there had to be another room. Just for the stuff to work, there had to be a room next to the room that I'd already
yeah,
sort of described, and then I had to just put a note to myself to make sure you mentioned this earlier, because I've sort of got someone getting pushed in through a doorway into another room. And
yeah,
just the way that it worked, you had to sort of get some guy out of the corridor and out of the way. Like, how am I going to get him out? Oh, it just there's another door that you can step out of, get pushed out of. But
yeah. And it's funny.
um,
Yeah, so the physics of or the geography of the story.
yeah,
It's what I'm reading. I'm still reading The Winter King, and it's what is really impressing me about the book is the level of detail. It's just kind of chock a block with all those small incidental details, often about the kind of the countryside. There's a flood down the valley, or
I think it's
something's
very.
moving.
I think it's his most Tolkien-esque book.
Yeah,
I think
because
because it's very earthy and in touch with nature. It feels like you're stepping into a past time, Middle Earth, as the Anglo-Saxons would call Earth.
yeah,
It feels.
I feel like the kind of the island of Britain, the earth, the land, is one of the characters in the story. Because I've
Yeah,
read his Saxon series, and he's not as
it's not as good. It's not.
observant or as
No,
detailed with the
no.
the countryside as he
They're
is in
very
this.
good as well in their own
Mm.
way, but they're not the same. It's that sort of
Yeah,
level of. I know exactly what you mean.
homage
Are you
to Britain.
enjoying it more now, or is it still a
Yeah, I'm
slog?
enjoying it. The problem, I think I know too much about Bernard Cornwell. Um,
Mm.
so I know too much, his kind of his thing about Christians and
Well,
um
yeah.
he has ticks that I've seen before, and they're reappearing in the same character. So I just kind of feel I know too much of Bernard Cornwell.
Well, yeah. There. I guess this is probably in many cases probably the original. You'd written this for the first time, and now you've seen it all
Yeah,
repeat in the Saxon stuff, because the Saxon stuff is very derivative, I think, of
this,
the Winter King. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I'm hugely impressed. Still enjoying it. Still going. Um,
Yeah, I remember you didn't like it that much to start with, so it'd be interesting. I think possibly the second book in that series is the best one. I
okay.
think
Yeah,
the Enemy of God, I think, is
there you
the
go.
best title as well.
That's
It's a
Bernard
great
Cornwell.
title. It's a great title.
Yeah,
Well, the Winter King is a great title too, actually. The
yeah.
third one's called Excalibur, which I think is the weakest title
Okay.
of all
Yeah, I
three.
mentioned to my brother because he shares very similar reading tastes, and he said, "Ooh, have you got to the Treasures of Britain yet?" I said, well, no,
Mm.
not yet. And he goes,
Yeah,
"Ooh, it's really good."
that's the second book, I think. I
Okay,
think that's the
yeah,
second book when they've got the it's all about collecting these different, bringing together like a quest of Merlin wants to bring together all these different objects which are like the treasures, which when he gets them together he's going to be able to conjure up the gods or do something, and there's got to be sacrifices and all of that stuff, and so there's a real jeopardy and stuff going on, and it's very much more Dungeons and Dragons esque in
yeah,
that they're sort of on a quest for these magical, you know, things.
yeah. It's very good.
I love the fact that in those books there is magic, but it's never overtly magic. So you could believe it. You could sort of believe that there is magic, or you could believe there is no magic, and it's just Merlin saying there's magic.
Mm,
I thought that was very clever.
quite realistic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
realistic magic.
yes, yeah. I like the idea that the people at the time would have believed, oh, there's the gods have done this or there's magic, and I think that obviously I don't really believe that there is magic, but some people might do, but I
Yeah,
don't. But
yeah,
I think but I think the people at the time in the past, as some people nowadays do, still believe in magic and religion and all these things. But I think in the past, pretty much everybody did at some level. But
yeah.
anyway, so making progress on our writing, which is good, and we've got a new guest coming in today, which I'm excited about interviewing.
Yeah.
And before we get on to the guest, have we got anything else to say?
Maybe I'll jump in. But
Go
if
on,
you'd
say
like to help
something.
us with, would you like to help us with
Oh,
our running costs and get exclusive bonus episodes every month, along with other great perks, check out our Patreon page, which has some new and very exciting rewards, exclusive to you guys, and consider signing up from as little as £1 per month.
yeah. And well, now that we're on that, the thing of asking for people to help support us, just a reminder that we've got these new tiers that we introduced this month, and they're still in the month of January. We still have a what am I talking about? A sale. There's discounts still on. You put me off by
Yeah.
taking your hat off
We're
halfway
getting to
through
the
that
warm in
because
here now.
you suddenly took your hat off, and it's like, oh my goodness, the bald powerhouse is coming out.
Yeah, it's
Anyway,
shining.
we got a discount going on Patreon, and there's 20% off the new tiers. We've got these new ones: executive producer, VIP, and legend. And the previous tiers that we had are all 10% off. So yeah, have a look at that if you're interested in supporting us economically as well as just by listening. And if you don't fancy, or you cannot, or you don't want to spend money on us, which I totally understand, continue to listen to us for free on all the places where you do listen to your podcasts, or watch us as well on Spotify or YouTube. And if you enjoy the podcast, leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this, and share our posts widely on Facebook, X, Blue Sky. Tie your family to a chair and play a podcast on Alexa, wherever you are,
Yeah.
wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Make sure you're spreading the word and let people hear this wonderful podcast that is Rock Paper Swords. And we've got, as I said before, we've got a guest coming up today, who is another speaker on the Historical Novel Society conference that we're going to in Maynooth in Dublin. And I'm quite excited to meet him because he's been someone that I've seen on the circuit of different sort of festivals and things that I've been at.
Okay.
He's been there before or after. I've seen his name around a lot, but I've not actually read any of his books, although reading up on them before doing today's episode, I thought, probably should read some. I'm looking forward to hearing what he says. Have you read any of his books?
I haven't at all. No, I haven't even heard of him, to be honest, until we got him for the podcast. But it's funny. The writing world is funny like that. That people can be hugely successful. I don't really read crime, so
yeah. So it's interesting because he does historical crime. So we'll get him on and then we'll have a chat.
Okay. Today we're joined by Vaseem Khan, a crime writer whose work blends smart mystery with vivid settings and intriguing cultural insight. Vaseem is the author of 2 award-winning crime series set in India: the joyously original Baby Ganesh agency novels, featuring retired Mumbai policeman Inspector Ashwin Chopra, and a very unusual elephant partner, and the Malabar House historical crime series set in 1950s Bombay. In 2026, Vaseem returns readers to the world of Malabar House with The Edge of Darkness, the sixth installment featuring Persis Vadia, India's first female police detective, as she confronts political intrigue, cultural tension, and a baffling locked room murder on the edge of the jungles of northeast India. Vaseem also co-hosts the crime podcast Murder Junction and, outside fiction, works at University College London's Department of Security and Crime Science. Vaseem, welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords.
Well, delighted to be here. And may I say, what an amazingly professional delivery that was, Justin.
Thank you.
Wow.
It's reading stories to my kids, you know. You got to put drama into every sentence.
I used to always do the intros. I live into Justin now. I think he has the sort of the certain gravitas that just
He
makes
does.
it makes it all sound real and true.
Absolutely. He should be on news at 10.
Yeah, it should be.
So, Vasi, welcome, as Justin said. And could you, well, starting things off, could you just tell us a little bit about your new book, so The Edge of Darkness?
Right. So, well, this is the sixth in the Malabar House novels. And for those who don't know those books, they're set in 1950s India, just a few years after India became independent, after 300 odd years of the British rule in India. And they feature India's first female police detective, as Justin said. And she qualifies, and she's the only female detective in the country, and nobody knows what to do with her, so they shove her into Bombay's smallest police station called Malabar House, and that's why the first book is called Midnight at Malabar House. And she ends up working with an English forensic scientist named Archie Blackfinch, who is over from Scotland Yard to help the Bombay force set up its own forensic science service. And then the pair of them in that first book are thrown straight into a high-profile case, the murder of an English diplomat in Bombay. And these books essentially are about the history which I wish that I had been taught in school because it was my favorite subject. And I loved learning about Tudor England and the World Wars and all the rest of it. But we never learned anything about, this enormous stretch of time that Britain was in India as a colonial power and completely changed the trajectory of the nation to such an extent that the India we see today, this modern India, which is nearly a global superpower, is very much a function of the British time in India and what happened next after the British left in 1947. But it's a time that's never really been captured very much in fiction. The only book I know that's done it reasonably well is a literary novel called A Suitable Boy, which is
Yeah, I was thinking of that.
yeah, that's right. It's about 5 billion pages long, but but of course it is incredibly famous. But nobody had set crime novels there, and I thought, why don't I have a crack at it? And the series has been very, very popular, and hence why I'm allowed to keep writing it. And the sixth one, The Edge of Darkness, sees Persis um, banished to the northeastern jungles of India in 1951, an area called the Naga Hills district in Assam. And here, I mean, the district is famous because it is the home of multiple tribes who are notorious for being headhunters. So they'll wage war on each other, lop off each other's heads, boil them down, and use the skulls to decorate their villages. And she ends up billeted in an old colonial hotel, the Hotel Victoria. And then she's called one evening to the suite at the top where the governor of the area is staying, and it's locked, and she breaks in and she finds his headless corpse in there. And of course, so what we have here is essentially a locked room mystery, a closed circle mystery, because clearly one of the people at the hotel is cast of Europeans and Americans is responsible. So classic Agatha Christie style setup, but set in a very exotic historical environment.
And is Agatha Christie one of your inspirations with crime writing?
Yeah, very much so. In the first book, Midnight at Malabar House, I think it was the Observer that said that they commented that the style is very Agatha Christie-ish, and that's quite deliberate because I was a huge fan of Poirot when I was growing up. I used to watch the David Suchet series with my dad, and it's very strange because my dad didn't really speak very much English because he'd immigrated from the subcontinent back in the 1970s, and I was the first one of my siblings born here. Um, but he loved this show, and I always suspect it was partly because he had a mustache very much like David Suchet in the series. But halfway through every episode, he'd point at the screen And he turned to me, and in Urdu, his language, he would say, "That's the killer." And here's me with my sort of fancy education at top university, and saying to myself, "What the hell does my dad know? He can barely follow the words." And I'd always get it wrong,
Mm.
and he'd always get the killer. I had no idea what sort of intuition he had for it. But yes, ever since then, I've been in love with that whole golden age vibe where the sex and the swearing and the bloodletting is largely off stage, and it's much more about the cryptic puzzles and the character and the setting.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm interested in a process or the writing process a little bit now. You mentioned that your dad used to say, "Oh, he's the killer," and you think, "How the hell do you know?" And you think it was someone else and get it wrong. But when you're writing, do you know at the beginning who the killer's going to be, and do you plot out the whole story? Because I know lots of crime writers don't, and they sort of say, "I don't know until the last few chapters who the killer is, or halfway through, or whatever." So, what's that sort of process like for you, and or is it different in different books?
Yeah, before I answer that, I must say that my dad's passed on now, so I can say this now, but I think he was a massive blagger. I think he just guessed.
Do
And
you
we've
think he guessed?
established.
Do you think he
Yeah,
guessed the pronunciation of place names as well?
he just guessed. We established, of course, just before before this podcast in the pre-chat that you, Matthew, are also a massive blagger. And if you say things with enough confidence, people will believe you. And that's what my dad, he was always.
Don't give away my secrets. People actually on this podcast probably think I know what I'm talking about sometimes. Now you've just given the truth
Not
away that I
anymore.
know nothing. Yeah.
Oh, I've learned many secrets, people. Um, yeah, I start with the murder. I start with a crime, and I work my way backwards. And once I know who was killed and why they were killed, then I can work out multiple suspects who might have had a reason to kill that person. And then it's about sort of writing the whole plot out, putting in enough red herrings and cryptic clues and all the rest of it, and making sure it all hangs together. But with the Malabar House novels, because they are also historical pieces, and part of what I'm trying to do is something I call historical revisionism, which means that I'm looking at things that we think we know about this
Mm.
particular history of England and India, which are just not true, or that need updating, or we've learnt them through historians who perhaps don't have both sides of the story. And because I grew up in England, but at the age of 23, I went to live out in India for a decade, and that's when I really got into sort of Indian, both modern India, and then looking at Indian history. And what I try and do is bring a sort of balance to this era, just after India became independent. And one of the things that I often say is that not every Brit that went out to India was a sinner, not every Indian was a saint. But what I mean by that is that thousands of the Brits that went out to India were not on a colonial mission. They went out there because they were told that there's a fantastic opportunity for a career, particularly with the Indian civil service or in the army. Others went out there as missionaries, and we can argue the toss about whether missionary work is right or wrong, but they genuinely went out there to do what they felt was good. And then when partition happened, when the country was divided, and a million Indians died in religious riots, it wasn't the Brits that killed them. They had some responsibility for not supervising this transfer of populations, but it was a million ordinary Indians who murdered each other in these
Mm.
religious riots. So it's good and bad on both sides, and I think we're usually very biased one way or the other, and I try and use the Malabar House books to sort of set some of that straight.
Yeah, and I guess what's interesting about characters in novels is that they're complex, and kind of to have black and white characters makes it quite dull. So I imagine kind of crime fiction is a really good way of exploring this time and this period and the different peoples involved. And it struck me as you were speaking that for a crime novel, you have to have a set of characters who could possibly be the murderer. So they have kind of quite strong motivations or even quite strong personalities. So that must be really fun to work on your set of your cast of characters for a novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we go back to the whole Christie trope. I mean, she was an absolute master or mistress, whatever you want to call it these days at this. Um, and for me, I think part of the fun of this is trying to create not just credible people who might have committed the murder, but then using whatever skills authors have to disguise the fact that this person is a murderer and to make them look as innocent. And the trick is to make sure it's the intellectual challenge, right? The
Mm.
gauntlet that you throw down to the reader and say, look, I'm going to give you enough clues um, so that you can work it out if you're paying very close attention. But ultimately, if they don't work it out, then I win. But even if they do work it out somewhere near the end, I think it's still a win for the author because they've hopefully, had that sort of eureka moment where they feel really have a really warm glow about their own sort of intellectual capacities. So
Yeah, and I guess each novel is a puzzle in a way as well that the reader has satisfaction of guessing, um,
absolutely. I mean,
getting right. Hope.
you take The Edge of Darkness, right? So it begins with this sort of locked room mystery, and then as Persis cycles through the other people staying at this hotel, there's a pair of Europeans, there are a couple of American Baptist missionaries, there's an American miner who's been in country for a very, very long time in India in the Naga Hills, and all of them have both positive positive things about them, which makes us think this cannot possibly be the murderer. But then we also learn some darker aspects as we move through the book, which makes us then begin to think, okay, fine, that's got to be the one. And the trick is to make sure at any point of time, if someone is reading the book, say on page 200, they should have come to some conclusion as to who is most prominent in their mind as the killer. And
Mm.
then your job is to try and make sure that by the time they get to the end, it turns out they're completely wrong.
So back to the sort of the history of India in the 50s and thinking about that. I mean, I've been to India a few times. I used to work in an IT company, and there were teams of people working out in Pune. So I've been to Mumbai, but only flown into Mumbai, and then either did a drive, which was absolutely terrifying, up to Pune and back. Or after a few times of doing that, I said to the company, I refuse to do that anymore after a few near misses on the highway. I said, "Can I please?" Not me driving, getting driven by somebody, but it was absolutely terrifying. And then I said, can I please fly to Pune? And they were like, "Well, that costs an extra £50 or something." I was like, "I don't care, just please, do you want me to die? This is crazy." Anyway, but my point is that I've been there a few times, and not 10 years like you. And but the culture shock is huge. I remember the first time I went, it was very, very shocking to me, the difference of the divide between the rich and the poor, and just things that you see. And I've been to other places in the world that of similar um, levels of poverty at one side, but I don't think I've ever been anywhere else that's had such a huge divide. And the other thing, so for me, I guess what I'm saying is that this is like we're talking 10, 15 years ago, so very modern times. It's very culturally different to the way it was, to the way the West is now. But I lived in Spain for many years, and I moved out there in the early 80s. And Spain was very, very different even in the 80s than UK was then. And I'm thinking Spain in the 50s would have been very, very different to the Spain that I knew in the 80s. And I'm sure that India in the 50s would have been even further removed from anything I could really imagine. How do you go about taking your experiences of India and sort of extrapolating them back? And obviously, how do you research the history of the 50s and try to make it feel incredibly real and
Yeah, just
believable?
listening to you there brings back so many memories because I remember. So I went out there for the very first time in 1997. I was working for a company as a management consultant, and they sent me out there for 3 months. And as I said, I ended up staying 10 years. And I was wearing this woolen suit, because I'd completely failed to anticipate that it was like 45 degrees centigrade out
Where
there.
where did you go out to Mumbai?
Bombay, yeah. So
Yeah,
Bombay, or Mumbai as it's now
yeah.
obviously called. And you're right, the culture shock is like a slap in the face.
It's literally. I just remember the very first time that I flew out there. It was me and another English guy. Neither of us had been out before. We were flown out for the company, and we had to arrive. We arrived late in Mumbai, but it was like 11 o'clock at night, and we got out of the got our luggage, whatever, and it was air conditioned. The airport, and then came to the bit where you got to the doors, and the doors opened, and
Yeah,
my glasses just steamed up
yeah, absolutely
because it
right.
was so incredibly hot and humid, and suddenly the massive clamoring of noise, all the people holding up placards, shouting out the names of people for. And
Well, it's the noise and the color that
yeah,
gets you. And I remember I was
Mm.
in a taxi from the airport to the hotel, and we stopped at a traffic lights. And firstly, there was this great thumping on the side, and I looked around, and there was this enormous man wearing a sari, the female garment, and that was my first encounter with one of the what they call the eunuch population out there. And I just did what all Brits do when they come across something really odd and strange overseas. I just pretended it wasn't there, and I tried to focus on the traffic. But that was equally crazy. I mean, the chaos, the cars
yeah,
and the buses and the bicycles and people with no care for life or limb just wandering through. And through the middle of that, I remember came this enormous elephant with a person, a mahout on its back. And it was that sight that actually stayed with me. And 10 years later, when I got back to the UK, and it was my seventh book, but it was the first one that was ever published. It basically gave me a career, and it was called The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, which you mentioned earlier, about a middle-aged policeman in modern Mumbai who is forced into retirement, has to solve one last murder, but then he also inherits this baby elephant on his last day. And I never expected that book to be published. I mean, it's bonkers, right? Who puts an And it was because I'd been trying for 20 years to get published, and I'd given up mentally pretty much, that I thought, well, screw it, I'll just put an elephant in here, and it's never going to see the light of day anyway. And I was as surprised as anyone else when I got a 4 book deal from a big publisher, and then they put me on BBC Breakfast, and the whole thing sort of took off. And the odd thing is, I wrote 5 books in that series looking at different aspects of modern Mumbai, and I haven't written a book in that series for about 6 years, and yet they still keep selling, and people still keep writing to me from around the world because they were published in different languages. And they always have 2 questions: when you're going to do another one, and second, make sure nothing happens to that bloody elephant. So Um, and yeah, with the history, how do I research it? Well, you guys will know this. There's so many sources now that weren't available when we were, well, I won't say young because we're still all very, very young at heart. Anyway,
Obviously.
obviously,
um, so I've got loads of big tomes up there, traditional sort of middle-aged white historian books, which I love. No shade on middle-aged white historians. But then you've got so many online sources now, not just digitized history, but social media, Pathé news clips on YouTube and
Mm.
Facebook pages. There's a brilliant Facebook page called Old Bombay, which has, history that people have dug up from their lofts in Mumbai or Bombay from their grandparents' time, and stuck up photos and first-hand accounts of what life was like in 1950s India. So all of these amazing sources come together, and as you know, you probably end up using less than 1% of it all.
yeah.
So you said you'd written 7 books before you got published?
Yes, 7 rejected books, which is the operative
Wow. So
word.
so you were very determined.
I wanted to be a novelist from when I
Yeah.
was a teenager. I fell in love with books, and I fell in love with writing. I wrote my first novel age 17. I was a huge fan of Terry Pratchett's Discworld, so I wrote a comic fantasy because I thought, yeah, this looks really easy. I sent it in, told my parents I'm not going to university because I'm going to be a rich and famous writer. Bearing in mind, immigrant parents, who's slaving away to
Yeah.
try and get you the best education possible. Yeah, they weren't best pleased with that. Luckily for them, I suppose for me in the long run, the book was crap and it was rejected roundly. Um, one agent even wrote back to say, "Don't write another word ever," which
Wow,
I thought that was quite harsh to say to a
Yeah.
17-year-old. But anyway,
that
uh,
that is pretty harsh. Yeah.
really harsh. But 6 more novels across a whole range of genres, until, as I said, I was finally published at age 40.
So crime was the magic key.
I'm not even sure if it was the crime element because I asked my publisher at Hodder.
Hmm.
I said, why did you buy these, Inspector Chopra, or as they call the Baby Ganesh Agency books? Um, and she said it literally was that baby elephant that you
It's
threw
the
in,
elephant.
and the
Yeah,
way
it's the
that you
Yeah.
elephant.
tackled it, and the way that you brought the country to life. It was just something so unique. And she said, she remembered going into a pitch meeting where she has to, as a commissioning editor, has to pitch the sales team and everybody else, and she just said everybody looked at me as if I was crazy for a minute, and then
Yeah.
they all began to see the possibilities of, this would be something new and distinctive to market in the crime and mystery section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you're now on your 6th novel for this character. Um, how has how has she developed over those 6 novels?
So this is the Malabar House series now.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Yeah,
first
so
is
the sixth
Wadia.
one
Yeah,
in that series. Well, she starts off. So to give you some background about her, when I was first thinking about the series, I thought, let's have another male character because I'm not a woman. What right have I to write a woman? But then I thought, this is 1950s India, very paternalistic. Police organization institutions are incredibly misogynistic. Wouldn't it be more fun to put a woman, India's first female detective, into that environment? And because she will have obstacles before she's even got to the case. And as authors, we know that conflict is both interesting to write, but also interesting for readers. And so that's where she came from.
Mm.
I dug up some stories of some amazing female pioneers of that era, not police women. The first police inspector, a female police inspector, came along in the 1960s, so she predates that. But she's a very particular kind of person. She's grown up living with her father above a bookshop, their bookshop. She's lost her mother at a young age, so she's been raised by her dad, Sam Wadia. And she is one of these people who is so locked into ambition, so locked into achieving, and particularly for her, trying to prove that she's as good as any man on the police force, that she will ride roughshod over the social niceties, which in my opinion is fine. We love our
Mm.
maverick male hero cops who will just defy authority and do whatever it takes. So why not a female Indian cop?
yeah. Well, have you had any pushback from anyone? You mentioned like at the beginning, you sort of thought, well, how have I got? Can I write a main character that's a female character? And I guess I would feel something similar probably, and I've struggled in the past thinking about could I write characters or main characters from different racial backgrounds or different ethnicities, and it's definitely a modern thing that I think we would probably question more as writers than we would have done 30, 40, 50 years ago. Perhaps we wouldn't have worried about it at all then. But have you had any pushback from anyone else? I mean, you obviously
No,
went there.
yeah, no. I mean, I think if I'd written it in first person, I would have had a bit more of an issue. But what you reference is, of course, this whole sort of dreaded specter of cultural
Mm,
appropriation and the like, which, I've got very strong opinions on because I honestly believe every writer has the right to write whatever they wish. That's the whole purpose of fiction. Of course, if you're disrespectful to the communities that you're writing about and you're not from that community, yeah, you can cause yourself lots of problems. But I think most authors who try and tackle that, and if you look at it in the nth degree, right, you can be completely absurd and say, look, if I only write what I know, all I can write is a biography.
well, yeah,
What right have I got to write even about murderers? I mean, I'm not a murderer the last time
exactly,
I
exactly.
mean,
Well, I
I
wrote
might be, but I'm not
I
the
had this conversation once with someone on a panel, and they were a person from America, writer from America, and it's just actually not. We were doing like a chat before the panel. We just did, then it came up, and they sort of said something about that people of different ethnicities could never write. That me as a white man could never write a character, a black character or something, and I said I don't understand the logic. I said, I mean, I write books about 7th century warriors in Britain. So
Yeah,
I'm not a 7th century warrior
absolutely.
in Britain. I'm as far removed from a 7th century warrior in Britain as I am from a black person in America in the 19th
Absolutely.
century. I mean, it's like
And if
these
you,
are
if you look at the
totally
recent
different.
phenomenon of romanticy,
Yeah,
I mean, how many people have hung out with dragons and elves and the like, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly.
I think it's more of an issue that the publishing industry is slightly running scared and,
Mm,
wants to have their I's dotted and their T's crossed. So they prefer people to write within their own community, especially for a lead protagonist. But if you look at the Malabar House novels, Percis's fellow detective, I mean, he's a forensic scientist, but he shares the limelight. He's a white man, and clearly I'm not a white guy. Um, the current series that I'm writing, which is set in the world of James Bond, and Q is the lead in a set of mysteries there. Q's a white guy. He's a 50-year-old white guy, and yet they came to me and they asked me to write that series. And
Mm.
did I hesitate because I thought, will I be torn down? No, because it was too good a gig to turn down. But also, I thought, who is anyone to tell any writer what they can and cannot write? Yes, it may not be well received. That's a different issue entirely. But nobody should tell us before we've even
yeah,
set out what we
Yeah.
should write.
I think the obligation is to do it well. And my first novel was, I used to work in rural China. My first novel was set in China, all Chinese characters. And there was a point I kind of thought, oh my Lord, this would never have got published now. And at the time, it was a huge hit. So yeah, I think your responsibility as a writer almost is to go into other people's heads of all
Yeah.
different ages, colors, sexes, and to do it as well as possible. And then you're judged by what you write, I think.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest examples that you can give is Alexander McCall Smith's number one lady detective agency.
Yeah.
So this is a Scottish middle-aged white guy writing a uh, an African woman set in Botswana. And God knows, 50 million sales around the world or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
clearly readers don't give a toss if it's well written enough. It's much more that it's the fear within the industry bods rather than readers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, isn't it? I think it's yeah, I think social media probably almost certainly has played a huge part in that, doesn't it? And just the fact that everything gets blown out of proportion with social media, and then I think companies and governments or anybody, from a position of power, takes that on and thinks, "Oh my goodness, this is a reflection of
Absolutely.
reality," but it's
Yeah.
not.
They're
And
easily
yet,
scared.
and yet, when they can sense money to be made, all of those scruples go
You
out the
don't care.
window.
Yeah,
And the and
Absolutely.
the, and the recent example of this is a book that I've just finished rereading. It's probably my favorite historical novel. I read it when I was a teenager, and then I've just come back to revisit it. And it's Shogun by James Clavell,
oh yeah, yeah,
which
Mm.
of course has now become another massive Apple TV series. And nobody mentioned the fact that he was a white man, who
yeah,
was clearly not born in medieval Japan in the samurai period, and yet he's writing the vast majority of the characters in this 1,000-page book are Japanese, and he's really going into great detail with the Japanese cultural environment of the samurai period.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah, it's funny because that's one of those books that people in Asia read a lot, or East Asia, because there's a whole series about the Hong Kong as well, and I'd kind of avoided them as they were I thought they were a bit lowbrow. And then I think when he died, I read an obituary in that he was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and I thought, oh, actually, maybe he does know. And reading Shogun a couple of years ago, I was struck that he seemed to really get kind of Japanese culture in a way that like children know their parents better than the parents know their children because so much of the children's kind of life depends on the parents' whims. And I thought maybe it's the same way in a prisoner of war camp that you're so kind of alert to the small nuances of your guards or your captors that you understand them in a way that they don't even realize. And you're alert to these tiny little kind of moments or moods or behaviors. Yeah, very interesting.
It's a fabulous achievement. I mean, as I said, it's like over 1,000 pages long and very big, dense pages as well. So it's probably
Mm,
the size of three novels. And the detail in it apparently it took him 3 years to just research and write this book, working flat out full time. And you can see it on the page. And it's just it's a fabulous adventure story as much as it is a historical piece. And I think that's what sets really good historical novels apart from the average ones where there is a clear narrative arc so that you're swept along by the story as much as you are by the history. And you can see it in other great
mm,
novels like Wolf Hall and Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks, which is,
yeah.
was my first experience of learning what the World War One was truly like for the soldiers who were there in the trenches and on the ground.
Mm.
Whereas when we learn it in history lessons, it's slightly more sanitized for our sort of youngish teenager brains.
Yeah. So tell us about this James Bond spin-off that you've been working on.
Oh, okay. I mean, I wasn't going to mention it because it's not really historical. It's a contemporary set of novels.
Yeah.
So I was approached by Ian Fleming, who's the creator of Bond, his family via their publishing arm, a couple of years ago. They had this idea of doing a series of crime mystery novels featuring Q. So Q's the hero rather than James Bond, and they're not spy novels. They're sort of halfway between Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club and Mick Herron's spy series, the Slow Horses spy series. And what happens is that Q is booted out of MI6 in the first book, which is called Quantum of Menace. He ends up in this small hometown just outside London, which he's been estranged from for 3 decades. And what's brought him back is that he's trying to unravel the mysterious death of his childhood friend, who's a quantum computer scientist, hence the title, Quantum of
Mm.
Menace. So it's really a story about a man who's lost his position as a scientist, a senior scientist at MI6, doing really important work on a national, on a global, international scale, helping the likes of James Bond to combat villains. And he's now forced into this microcosm of this tiny town, his hometown, which hasn't really changed a lot in 3 decades, but is beginning to change because of immigration and other issues. And he's having to butt heads with the local police who have sort of put this case to one side as misadventure, but he knows that it isn't. So you then got a traditional small town murder mystery with Q as playing amateur detective.
So that is set because James Bond is kind of set in the 50s as well, isn't he? This is a more contemporary.
Yes, very much a contemporary take,
Okay.
and that's pretty much what Ian Fleming's family wanted. You know, they didn't want another historical piece. They wanted something. And James Bond does appear. You know, it's like the movie James Bond. He just regenerates like Doctor Who
Yeah.
every decade. So my James Bond is very much the darker James Bond, the assassin from the books, rather than the jokey Roger Moore. And I do love Roger Moore. I grew up with Roger Moore. Not personally growing up in Roger Moore's house, but you know what I mean. He was the Bond that I that I grew up with. Um, so in my one, Commander James Bond does make an appearance in Quantum of Menace, but he's not the hero. Q is the hero.
How many books are you going to be doing for that series? Do you know? Is or you
Well, I'm contracted to do two. So the
okay?
second one will come out. The first one came out in last October, and the second one will come out this October. It's called The Man with the Golden Compass. So we've clearly had a lot of fun with the titles, and Q's a dryly humorous guy, so there's a note of dry humor running through the mysteries. Um, yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of fun, I've got to say.
Sounds to me like your work rate is pretty high. I'm just trying to work out how many books you've had published in how many years. How many books do you write per year?
Well, you're the first person who's ever said that to me. If you ask my wife, she'd say the exact opposite. I mean, she's always moaning at me for not doing DIY. And guys, honestly, there's nothing that interests me less in this universe than DIY, which is why I try and hide whenever I can when she's on the warpath. Um, for 10 years, I just basically did one book a year, which I think is manageable and straightforward, plenty of time to piss away your summer playing cricket as I do, so you don't have to get too. But the last 2 to 3 years have been a little bit more crowded. Um, I sold my publisher a psychological thriller set in small town America called The Girl in Celle, which took me longer than I thought. It took me 3 bloody years to finish, and then it was
Hmm.
published late, and it ended up having to be squashed in the same year as another Malabar House novel. And then, of course, these Q novels came along by surprise, and as I said, it was too good to turn down. And now you've got two different publishers all vying for me to have one book out in the same year. So the next couple of years are relatively crowded, and I've had to sort of be more structured with my time, getting up at sort of half six, 7 in the morning, making sure I put enough hours in, maybe missing the odd cricket match, which
Yeah.
is
So
very
what's
annoying.
so just I know we've got lots of writers both published or aspiring, that listen to the podcast. What's your sort of routine now that you've come to this? It sounds like you're probably trying to get at least two books a year written over the last year or two, and then maybe going forward for the next year
Well,
or so.
just just
So
just two, not at least two, just
just two, yeah. So what's your
Yeah.
process? What's your process at the moment then in terms of like your daily, writing day? You're working 5 days a week. You try. What's your word
I
count that
mean,
you aim for? All that sort of stuff.
I do workshops, right? And when I do these workshops, and people say to me, "Well, what's the magic ingredient?" And the truth is, there are two things that work. One is there's a barometer of quality, however you want to define it. But the number one reason that most agents reject books is because they're not written to a standard that agent can see ever published, and therefore they can never pass on to any commissioning editor or any publishing house. And
Hmm.
it's and you know based depending on the type of book you're trying to write, the best thing you can do is go out, buy five of the best known authors in that genre, but buy the book that made them famous. Sometimes it's not the first book in their career or their series. It might, a famous example, I guess, is Ian Rankin's Rebus novels. It wasn't until his fifth or sixth Rebus novel that he really hit his stride, and that was the one that suddenly jumped him to the next level. So buy five of those in the genre you're trying to write, analyze them to death, and then see if you can get your writing to that standard. That's one reason. And the second reason is people are not organized. They don't organize their time. They give up very quickly. They'll get a really great idea in their head and they'll go charging off to try and write it, get stuck after 10,000 words and not know where they're going and run out of steam. And there's nothing wrong with pantsing it, as they say, just trying to write with just an idea in head. And there's very famous writers who do that. Anne Cleeves, Lisa Jewell. But I always think that for newer writers who are trying to get into the industry, it makes more sense to plan things out, give yourself the time and the breathing space to work on a really detailed plan, because then you will iron out all of the problems and issues before you start work. And that's what I do. So I'll spend 2 to 3 months making a very detailed plan of the entire book. Then when I start writing, get up early in the morning, do 1,000 to 1,500 words every day. I'll edit as I go. And by sticking to that routine, I'll probably get a novel written in, used to be about 8 to 9 months. Now I'm having to do it in about 6 months.
Yeah, that's very similar to to me. I mean, at the moment, I'm doing 3 books every 2 years. That's my contract at the moment. I've done a 3 book contract. I was doing 2 books a year for a bit, and then I just said I can't keep on doing it. Yeah, it's just too much. There was no space to really have time off, and you're just going from one book to the next. And I think one of the things that we've discussed quite a few times is the difficulty. The faster your process is, and the number of books you got coming out, people don't think about the fact that you then have this overlap of, like, I'm 35,000 words into the first draft of a novel now. Just before Christmas, I suddenly received the editorial comments for the book that's coming out in June, and I had to stop what I was writing at 25,000 words into this new book. My editor had sat on I'd given him the manuscript in September. He'd not sent it to me until early January, early December, and then he'd said, like, "Oh, you've got basically 2 weeks to get me all the get this rewritten, because it needs to get onto the the treadmill for whatever, for the dates, for publishing for the next thing." And then in between that, then so that derails you. Then work on that, and then I got something else, and it's like, oh, we're going to reissue the book that came out 5 years ago. We're going to reissue that. We'd like to add a preface to that. Could you write that? Could you, all these sort of things. And every time these things come along, they're great, but it's like, oh my god, I've now got to stop thinking about the book that I've just spent 2 months trying to get my head around, and then yeah.
That is word for word what has just happened to me. In September, I handed in The Man with the Golden Compass, the second Q novel. And then I was 30,000 words into the seventh Malabar House novel. In December, I got my edits back, had to stop for 2 weeks, edit The Man with the Golden Compass, send it back. And now I'm back trying to pick up the pieces after after you stop. Well, it's even worse for me, because somewhere in the middle of that I had to take like 3 days out and write a short story featuring Sherlock Holmes for a new official Sherlock Holmes anthology that Simon and Schuster are publishing next year. And they wanted it written in Conan Doyle's voice,
style,
style, which meant having to read and listen to the original short stories, which I loved. There's for listeners, Hugh Bonneville does a brilliant rendition of the original Sherlock Holmes short stories, which you can listen to for free if you just Google Hugh Bonneville Sherlock Holmes. And then I pitched to them that I will take Sherlock Holmes to India for the very first time, and they liked that, so I ended up doing that, which made it slightly easier.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds great. No, but that really it is a real window into the life of a proper jobbing writer, that when you've got these things coming in and these overlaps, and just having, because it's so difficult to get your head back into the headspace of the novels, but they're complex. We were just talking about it before you came on, and just saying about how writing, you're often challenging yourself writing a new time or a new period, or it's a totally different plot. In your case now, you're doing this closed room, and it's very complex stuff, and as you're writing, you're trying to put all these pieces together of the jigsaw in your brain, and then to get derailed and say, right now, stop that, and take 2 weeks off, do something else completely, which is also as taxing, perhaps.
Yeah,
But
I tell you what helps me is when I have to get back on the horse for a book that I'm sort of halfway through and has been interrupted. I try and read books in that space by other authors who are writing something similar or
yeah,
of that period. And one of the touchstones for me, possibly why I write the Malabar House novels, is Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, which is one of my favorite novels. And I first encountered this book when I was living in India. And you have to picture the scene. So the monsoon was on, and the roads were sort of getting flooded out, and I couldn't go home. And I saw this bookshop which I'd never seen before, because there weren't many bookshops back in 1997 in Bombay, certainly not one selling English books. And for some weird reason, there was a goat tethered outside, but that's just normal for anyway. I ducked in and I found this book, Midnight's Children, looked at the back cover, won the Booker Prize, Indian history. I thought, oh, okay, this sounds good. Could not put it down for 2 days. It was all the history that I had never been taught,
Hmm.
set all the way from sort of early 1900s India to Indian independence, and just slightly a couple of decades beyond. And if there's any book that's inspired my writing, it's probably this one, and the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett.
that's brilliant. And again, that's really interesting what you said about trying to get back into the headspace of a book or a time period or something to go and read other writers. We've also said the same thing. Both Justin and I have said the same. Like it's a great way of doing it. I'll often listen to the audiobooks. I walk my take the dog for a walk at lunchtime, whatever, and I'll listen to audiobooks of writers that are writing in the same sort of thing, similar genre or similar time or place or whatever.
And if you're
It's
if you're very lucky and paying attention, there's probably something you can filch from from these other writers.
I could never, I cannot, what's the term? I can't agree or
Oh
deny
yes,
anything.
Matthew, you're on
Confirm or
it.
deny.
Yeah, you're
Yes, I cannot confirm or deny that. Yes,
Yeah.
say that. I listen to the audiobooks of my own books as well when I come to write the sequels. I don't know if you do that. When you come to write, I'm 11 books into one series now, and I had a couple of books out in a different series in between, and I couldn't remember half of what was going on, so I had to go back and listen to some of the audiobooks of my own
Yeah,
books
this is
to
why
try
you've
to
got to
remember.
keep a little cheat sheet.
I do
Because
keep notes, but there's 11 books. A lot. There's
I
a lot.
know,
Yeah.
I know it's tough.
My publisher of the 11th one's come out in June, and they said perhaps we should include now a list of all the characters in the book. Like we've never done it before, and I said, well, that's going to be like 300 plus characters. I don't know which ones do you really want to have. Anyway, they said no, let's not bother.
But I think of so Lord of the Rings, and what poor old Tolkien, after 20 years of working on this, his brain must have been cheese when he's trying to recall the thousand odd characters in this epic.
I know, and I think he must have been very very special, and also you can see why he didn't really write any other. Much. He did write some other stuff, but
Yeah.
he didn't. He write tons of other novels set in different time periods and stuff.
Yeah. You can
He's
imagine
stuck
him
with that. Yeah.
you can imagine him finishing it, handing it to his editor, and then breaking his pen ceremoniously in front of the editor and just saying to him, "Don't ever, ever ask me to write another bloody word."
I think he probably loved doing it, but I just imagine the editor. I imagine more, the editor receiving it and going, "Oh my god, well, I've got to edit this."
Well, when we mentioned The Suitable Boy earlier, and that took, I don't know, 10 or 15 years for Vikram Seth to finish. And when they finished it and they tried to send proofs out, nobody wanted a proof, because as soon as they received it or they heard
Yeah,
about how long it was, they said, no, no, thank you. And there was one famous writer who actually said to him, look, I'm not going to read the damn thing. I'll just give you a damn quote. Just, just,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But great
That's
book. If anyone hasn't read that, really recommend it.
yeah.
yeah. It's odd,
That's
isn't
a
it? A million odd words about a
Yeah.
woman trying to find, as it says,
A husband.
a husband for her daughter to marry. And it digresses, and you've got sort of dozens and dozens of pages at points where, I mean, I think at one point he spends 50 pages looking at the workings of a shoe factory in some village in India,
Yeah.
or the legislation of rural farming for 50 pages. But somehow he manages to make it interesting.
Yeah. It has a great opening scene as well, because it just sets up the story so well, the characters so well, and then just the whole thing rolls from there.
Yeah. I guess that's another lesson that I guess we all share, right? That, for younger authors or newer authors, if you're trying to write history, it pays to read a very wide variety of historical novels, not just
Yeah.
the genre you might be, if you wanted to write Tudor stuff, don't just read the Tudor novels, read a
Mhm.
wide variety of historical books because you're picking up, it's seeping into you, and you're thinking, when I think of a book like Shogun and the way that he handles the adventure side of that and making me want to turn the pages while I learn history, that's the trick in itself.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking we've touched on lots of different things. Obviously, all your different books and things. But one thing we haven't talked about at all is your podcast. You co-host a podcast called Murder Junction. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how has podcasting influenced, if at all, your relationship to your writing? Has it affected it at all? Has it affected you as a reader or as a storyteller or a fan?
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? This podcasting phenomenon, as you well know, because you sort of stumble into it. Well, at least we did. Myself and my colleague Abir Mukherjee, who's another fabulous writer of historical novels set in 1920s India, mystery novels. And he and I, we just decided that at some point, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, that there was no one like us from our background, our heritage, doing a sort of a mystery or crime novel podcast. And so we decided to start interviewing some of our friends, and we started with Anne Cleeves, and then it snowballed from there. And probably most of the world's most famous crime writers, any name that you can think of, Lee Child, and whoever you can think of probably has been on there at some point or another. And what we've discovered is that because we have a lot of fun and we joke around with people, it often surprises them that they come on the podcast thinking it's going to be quite po-faced and literary. And we discuss their books, but then we go off at all sorts of weird and wonderful tangents. And I think it's helped us to just get a perspective of how other writers, very successful writers, but also newer writers, how
Mm.
they work, what are their concerns, how they approach the business of writing mysteries and thrillers and all the rest of it. But I think it also keeps us quite abreast of what's happening in the industry as a whole, which is, not to be sneezed at. Most writers tend to be hidden away in their basement dungeons, slaving away, except for the few times a year when they're carted out by their publisher and thrown in front of
Kind
a
of
rabid audience.
blinking into the daylight.
Yeah, blinking into the daylight. But because of the podcast, we are continuously out there, and publishers are talking to us and dealing with us, trying to get their writers on, et cetera, et cetera. And that helps to keep our fingers on the pulse.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
You probably find the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. I think the social aspect for us as well as talking about being stuck away all the time, but the fact that you get to speak to other people, even if virtually, many of the times, is great because we do spend all the time on our own with our dogs. If you've got a dog, both Justin and I have got dogs. So you're either walking the dog or you're doing the housework or you're writing, and that's it. And then you spend time with your family, your immediate family, and your dog, and very little time. It's not like you're going to an office environment when you get to actually meet other adults and talk about things.
Yeah.
So
You spend more time with your imaginary friends, which is a slightly unhealthy way to be.
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, to be fair, I do because I still have one toe at University College London. Although to be fair, the writing has taken over. But I
Mm.
love being associated with a Department of Security and Crime Science because they're always working on stuff that I can use as a crime
Yeah.
writer. And the plot for Quantum of Menace, the first Q novel, literally came out of discussions with an academic colleague of mine at UCL who was thinking about doing a project around how quantum computers might be used by criminals.
I
So,
thought you were going to say they were thinking about killing someone.
oh, no, that's not. Academics do that on a daily basis. Usually they're students.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
fair enough.
usually at marking time.
So I mean, one of the so the social aspect is great of doing the podcast, and sometimes we actually get to meet people face to face in real life, and we're going to actually all three of us be in the same place at the same time in August in in Ireland for the Historical Novel Society conference in a place called either, depending how you pronounce it, Maynooth or Maynooth. I think it's Maynooth. You think it's Maynooth. We're not sure.
Well,
So anyone,
I don't think anything,
you don't think, okay,
Matthew,
you,
because
well,
I saw two O's in the spelling, and so I just assumed, like most logical people, Nuth. However, you torpedoed that suggestion, you poo-pooed that suggestion
yeah,
by very confidently pronouncing it Maynooth, and then my son
Maynooth.
Justin Maynooth, sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
just
Yeah.
I just changed the
Actually, that's my
emphasis a bit.
sister-in-law. She's Irish, and she'll know. But
I,
you were so
I,
confident, Matthew. We went with whatever you say.
well, wherever it's going to be in Maynooth, near Dublin, it's
yeah.
going to be great to be there with the Historical Novel Society conference and get to meet you face to face and maybe have a drink and watch,
Absolutely.
listen to you talking. What are you talking about? Have you got a talk already planned, or are you a keynote speaker? I can't remember now. What you're?
I am a keynote speaker, and I think they'd like me to talk about one of the topics that we've been discussing today, which is,
Oh, I
what
lost your
right,
audio then.
yeah, what right do we have to write particular kinds of characters from
Mm.
history if they're not very closely aligned to our own backgrounds?
Oh yeah,
And
yes,
it would be
that's
quite
Good.
an interesting.
and you have strong thoughts about it as you've
Yeah,
I will,
great.
said today. So it's,
I will display your Trumpian levels of self-confidence when I get on
oh,
this, so that everything I say will be considered to be
please, of everything you said, don't accuse me of being like Donald Trump. That's too much of an insult. I can't,
But
I
I
may
do.
have to now challenge you to a duel on the common or something outside Maynooth. Uh,
I take it back.
yeah,
Nobody.
I can't bear that's too much. That's too much. But I look forward to hearing you talk, and it sounds like it's going to be great fun, and looking forward to seeing your books, more books out there. I'm going to have to read one of your books now. I haven't read any of your books, so which would
And
you
vice
recommend?
versa.
If I have
And
to buy
vice versa.
one book,
Oh,
what
I
should I
don't know.
start
I
with?
mean, you've heard all about them now, so I'm sure you can decide for yourself
Oh,
if you'd really like
okay.
to
Go
read.
the Baby Ganesh Agency, surely. Uh,
You
Killer
don't have
Elephant.
to. You don't have to. I think we should all. I think the three of us should get together and write a romantasy and just work on.
Okay, you that seems reasonable. I
Yeah.
could do the action stuff. I'll do all the fight scenes. You can write the sex scenes with elephants,
Oh
the sort
no!
of
So
fairies or
my
something.
version of romantasy
Oh, okay.
is a blend of romance and accountancy.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. In that case, yeah, maybe I'm not so interested. That sounds that sounds very Terry Pratchetty. I think
yeah,
yeah, okay. But
that's where we would have gone.
I've
Come
got
on, sexy
two
accountants and dragons on dragons.
Yeah.
sexy accountants riding elephants. There you go.
Yes. Yeah,
Perfect.
there we go. There we go.
Flying elephants with
There
sexy
you go.
accountants. I could
There
we
you
could
go.
write
Who
that.
wouldn't buy that?
Sounds good. Well, on that note, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been great having you.
It's been an absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Absolute pleasure.
So
That was a lovely chat.
Vaseem has left. Yeah, it was a good chat, wasn't it? It was very
Yeah.
So we've interviewed two keynote speakers from the Historical Novel Society, Essie Fox last episode, and then now Vaseem Khan. You can see why they're keynote speakers, both very good
Yeah.
speakers, both with a lot of interesting things to say. So looking forward to hearing them both speak. And it was brilliant, really good value and fun.
Yeah. Amazing. He'd written 6 novels before he wrote his, the one that got published.
Yes,
that is
yeah.
dedication.
It is, and I didn't say that my first novel that was published was my very first book that I'd ever written, because I felt that would be
The same.
I if I'd written that and I hadn't managed to make any money out of it or publish it or anything, I wouldn't have, well, I mean, I didn't manage to get it traditionally published first, The Serpent Sword. I had to self-publish it, and then it did well, and then I got a traditional publishing deal. But if I'd not managed to sort of self-publish it successfully, I think I probably would have given up after a couple of books. I don't think I'd have it in me just to keep writing. It's such a hard job just to keep doing it if nothing's happening. I just don't think I'd bother.
Yeah. Taking rejection letters.
Well, yeah, just putting all the effort into writing books. I mean, you wanted to be a writer all your life, didn't you? You wanted
Yeah, I
since
was
you were
like
a kid.
Vaseem, so
But I
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, I wasn't against the idea. I mean, I like writing and everything, but it wasn't like this is my dream, you know. So I suppose there's a difference there that for him, if that's what you set your goal on.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting, and I love the. I think of all the things that he talked about, you know, I am probably most interested in the Indian novels. I mean, most of his books have been set in India more than the James Bond one. But I think I'm definitely going to check out the podcast Murder Junction, and
Yeah.
I'm toying with either the first of the Malabar House series, which I like the idea of the historical, or the first of the Ashwin Chopra ones, because of course I've been to India, been to Mumbai, so it'd be quite nice to see his sort of take on modern Mumbai and see if I recognize it. But yeah,
Yeah,
really,
it's such an interesting period of time, and he's writing that. You know, we did a little bit of Indian history, but I think it was Clive of India, so it was the other end of the empire.
yes, yeah,
And when I first left China the first time, I came back by land, and I went kind of through Xinjiang and Kashgar, and then into Pakistan and down the Karakoram Highway. And I had a bizarre expectation that it'd be kind of like a gradient of gradually getting more and more Western as you came westwards into Turkey and things. And actually, the most Western people were living in the Hunza Valley in the north of Pakistan, where they were Ismaili Muslims, so very moderate. Their women were out, kind of, you know, with their hair uncovered and walking in the fields. So it was just a very interesting place. And we stopped at Lahore, and we were staying at the YMCA, and it felt like the YMCA had kind of been, all the furniture was left over from the days of the Raj. It was it was mothballed, and the whole kind of floor was not used. It was amazing, very interesting. Yeah, so very interesting time and period, and interesting to see what happened after British India, the end of the Raj.
Yeah, very very interesting. Yeah, all round really, and yeah, very interesting guest to have on. I think one of the things I was I thought was particularly resonant or resonated with me was the fact that his writing experience is so similar to ours. You know, his process, you know, like the planning and then the writing, a couple of thousand words a day, then editing, and you know, talking about the different things that happened. Very very similar to you know, and discipline, and discipline, and having to. And saying, you know, reading books by similar authors to try to get your head into the space of a book of a period, all things that we've talked about doing. So, you know, works for us, works for him. So,
if you are aspiring out there and listening to this, then keep reading, set yourself a goal, daily word count, keep chipping away, because you get there.
Discipline and brick by brick. You know, you don't build a house and all the bricks at the same time. You do one brick at a time, and it's the same with writing.
It's true.
So, but that's it for today's episode, people. We hope you've enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a review and subscribe to the podcast. And thanks to all of our patrons, and a very special shout out to our Patreon producers: Adam Turner, Ben Mayer, Andy Maxwell, Ben Fox, George Johnson, and Matt Muller.
You can sign up on Patreon to support us from as little as £1 per month. And don't forget that there are now new tiers with even more rewards!
And until next time, a rock, paper, swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harffy.
And it's goodbye from me, Justin Hill.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind.
Stay safe.
And happy reading.